Hi, thanks everyone for coming. I'm Rika Drea.
And I'm Alan Barstow. We are indeed teachers here at the Crossroads School for Arts and Sciences. And what we would like to do is just thank the TEDx Club for putting this together. So let's give applause for these students. Thank you. And we're also here because we have some big asks. And we ask a lot of our students. We ask our students to embark upon journeys into literary worlds and into the undiscovered country, as Hamlet would put it, of their own writing.
We ask students essay questions, test questions, discussion questions. We also ask our students to recognize different types of questions: open questions, closed questions, clarifying questions, interpretive questions. You could say we're sort of de facto question scientists. So when a question comes up, we stop and think.
Yeah. So I'm a father of 2 boys born 4 months apart. That brings up a lot of questions. I've heard questions like, why don't your children look alike? Are you their real dad? Which one is really yours? And do you love them the same?
And I'm biracial and told that I'm rather pale. And that brings up some questions, such as, are you really half Asian? Is that really your mom? And why don't you speak Japanese?
I've heard questions like, why is your nose so tall? Why is my grade so low? How can you not know what a lentil is? And how can you possibly give me this grade?
And I've heard, are you old enough to see this movie? Is this a PE class? Is this really an English class? And what are you guys going to talk about anyway?
Yeah, so you might be wondering, that's a really good question, like what is our TED Talk about?
But before we answer that, we're going to offer up one more misdirection.
Yeah. So picture the scene. Saturday morning in the San Fernando Valley, it's beautiful, where 20 English teachers from around Los Angeles have decided to descend into the subterranean labyrinth of the Buckley School to discuss, of all things, the literature of these United States. All right, and it's a key part of the story here that 20 of us gathered to discuss American literature.
Yes, because the text that dominated that day was the Odyssey.
Yeah. You know the Odyssey. You probably read it in 9th grade, or it was assigned to you and you didn't read it. Like me, I'm really sorry, Miss Wallingford, and how ironic or coincidental that I'm a teacher now. So you know the Odyssey, right? Post-Trojan War, ancient Greece, angry sea gods, Cyclops, you know it.
Yes, and definitely not American, and definitely not a text in any of our American literature courses.
Yeah, and so how did that come up in our discussion of American literature? And what we believe is that we got stuck on that question of the Odyssey simply because we've lost the art of asking questions.
Yes, we think that the art has been stamped down like so many questions, because the more we repeat certain processes.
Yeah, think of the academic calendar, think of the college application process, think of grades, think of the election cycle, think of the electoral college, on and on.
Then the less time, space, and energy we have for questions. In fact, questions become threats. Politicians no longer accept questions from the press, and guests on talk show hosts vet questions beforehand, dictating what can and can't be asked. In fact, sometimes teachers lecture in an effort to avoid having to answer questions.
Wait, are
we lecturing?
No.
No, okay.
We think that once we've mastered something, why would we dare change it?
Yes. And so that brings us to thinking about the implications of change. Of course, there are monetary ones. We won't go there. We're English teachers. So we'll take a more etymological route, and we'll consider the origin and definition of mastery. So mastery comes to us from the 13th century French, and it's currently a buzzword in education. We have the mastery transcript, and we have standards-based grading based on achieving mastery. Mastery entrances us. We think, I've mastered it, so I no longer have to ask about it.
But there's the rub, as Hamlet, Prince of Questions, might say. To master or not to master? That's not the question.
Do you think English teachers think illusions are good?
Well, yeah, and I wonder why we do that. That's a really good question. Maybe it's to cover up our nervousness or insecurities about our subject matter.
Yeah, this is a possibility. We should explore that more. But for right now,
Yeah.
we'll go on with why we've gathered here today, which is to redefine the future. And my question is, how can we redefine something that by definition is indefinite?
That is a good question. So what can we do? Let's redefine our relationship with questions.
And that's such a good starting point. And actually, there's already a group out there doing that called the Right Question Institute. Founded by Luz Santana and Dan Rothstein, the Right Question Institute posits that we can use questions as catalysts to microdemocracy, which means essentially that we can use the right questions in everyday encounters to help us make better decisions, find better outcomes, and ultimately have better relationships.
Yeah. So those people who ask me about my children, they're 4 months apart, if I love them the same, why do they look like? I think what they really could be asking, the right questions could be, what is fatherhood? What is family? What is love?
And when I think of the people who ask me, are you really half Asian? Is she really your mom? And why don't you speak Japanese? I think there's one simple right question they could ask, which is, what's your family story?
So questions, as it turns out, requires more grace than maybe we think. And so redefining the future then means redefining the art of asking questions.
And this brings us to our first big ask, which is engage openly. So how many of us have been through that perfunctory, how are you? I'm fine. Have we done this? Okay, so we're gonna do a little role playing here. So, hey Alan, how are you?
Fine, you?
I guess I'm okay. Okay, let's try again. Hey Alan, how are you?
Hey, I'm in the middle of this TED Talk right now, and I'm getting really nervous.
Okay, I'm gonna go over here.
And
Yeah, you do your thing.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah. So the key here is this: if we're gonna ask, if we're gonna ask and be asked, we have to be open to engagement.
That's right. We have to stop texting and turning away and actually be open listeners, right? And being an open listener means that we understand the space and time that questions require.
Yeah. So should we try this one more time?
Yes. Okay. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. Hey, Alan, how are you?
You know, I'm doing good. I'm in the middle of this TED Talk right now. My palms are a little sweaty, and I'm thinking that we have 4 minutes left. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm feeling kind of similar. Like we're up here and we just keep asking questions, but I'm enjoying these questions.
Yeah, this is great. Yeah. So our posture, whether it be intellectual or physical, demands that we be open to questions, and that sets the tone for questions.
And note, we're saying ask and use as opposed to ask and answer. Answers seem so much more about ourselves rather than the ideas or the people in question. And this brings us to our second big ask. Ask open questions.
Yeah, so what's the big deal here? Closed questions ask for limited responses that reinforce our expectations, but open questions are invitations. But here's the problem, right? Sometimes we're asking open questions, but what we're expecting and what we secretly want is a closed response.
Nice. So as we align our postures for questions, we also need to align our questions with our expectations. And the greatest beneficiary of this alignment are identities. Rather than having to hide our identities and protect them from questions, we can actually use questions as invitations to open up and share our identities.
And so the more often we can bring our best selves to these questions, then the more open the process of inquiry becomes and the better the outcomes.
And it's recognizing this positive power of open questions that brings us to our third big ask, which is use open questions to open conversations.
Yeah, so it's easy to say, but difficult to practice. What we want to do is we want to avoid an evaluative layer to our questions. We want to avoid talking about efficiency or value or loss, because what that does is it closes down our processes and our thinking.
So at this point, you might be wondering, Alan and Rika, how do I form an open question and use it to open a conversation? So we'll do a little compare contrast.
Yeah. So those people who ask about my children, if I love them the same.
Maybe the right open question could be, hey, Alan, how do you find the emotional space for two children born so closely together?
Wow. That is the question. Yeah, maybe I really want to discuss this further. Maybe we can go out to lunch after this.
Oh, that's a great idea.
You know, we do have 80 seconds left.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. All right.
Yeah. So another question that we can get into here
Oh, yeah. We have one more example. I
is
forgot
about the
about this one.
Odyssey.
Oh, how could I forget about this question? Remember that first closed question that we faced? Don't we have to teach the Odyssey? So there's the closed version.
Yeah. The open version could be pretty simple. Why teach the Odyssey?
And it was as simple as that. Asking that one open question to our English department opened us up in very different ways. Most importantly, it brought out our identities and voices in ways that allowed us to work together more openly and have more open spaces for collaboration.
So the differences in these questions might seem inconsequential, might even seem laughable, but the goal here is that we're turning questions from tools into invitations.
That's right. And the more often that we can use questions as a way to invite out our identities, the more compassionately and considerately we'll treat ourselves, our students, and our futures. And so our biggest ask here at the Crossroads School for Arts and Sciences is to think about the art and science of questions.
And we're guessing, since you're here, thinking about redefining the future, you have some big questions percolating.
And so to get the ball rolling, what we did was we went around and we asked our colleagues for the big questions that they had on their minds.
And so some of the questions that popped up, colleagues asked, why do we use grades?
And in the athletic department, it was, since concussions in youth sports are on the rise, what techniques can coaches use to better protect our student athletes?
Yeah. Why do we teach through discipline and department?
And what is my role as a teacher in terms of exposing students to ideas that make them uncomfortable?
And what does it mean to enjoy life?
And how far am I willing to go to tackle these questions?
Yeah, and you know, I'm kind of wondering, where can I get some water right now?
Yeah, that's a good question. We have been talking for a while. And I'm also wondering, why did we only reference male protagonists and male texts in our talk?
Yeah, that is a great question. And I'm excited to see where that question will take us. So you too have big asks. And so what we ask you to do is to engage openly.
Get in your open question stance. Get ready.
Yeah. Pose open questions and be open to the surprising directions those questions will take you. Thank you.
Thank you.